I had found a house out in the country from Overton, and we settled in. Our oldest one started to school, and that we were there. We were there for 2 years, and settling in. We enjoyed being out in the country. The kids loved it. Started to school. That wasn't such a great thing, but we lived there until the fella across the road, a truck driver with a family, decided he wanted the house I was renting. I rented a long ranch-style house that was nice, and I got it for $26 a month. And the lady, the owner, said I could have the house until the military moved me back. I had one more move until the military moved me back to Oklahoma City. Well, we drove into Overton, which was about 2 miles, to church. And one night when I got home from church, I didn't have any water. And this truck driver had dickered with the owner of the house, and I knew he wanted to buy it. And he knew that I was supposed to be there until we moved back to the city. But I didn't have any water, and the only thing we could figure out was that he just came over and took a sledgehammer, because there was damage. There was damage to the well pump. And my dad went to visit him, told him he better stay off the property till he got me moved out of there. So Dad had some property in Overton, and he fixed a little house, and we moved into Overton to stay the rest of the time that Fred was in service, which was probably 6 months. And then we moved back to the city. Fred was in service 44 months. He was in London during the Blitz, and he stayed in a flat up several stories in London, and when it was bombed, he was not there. He said if he had been there, he probably wouldn't have made it home. And he rescued all his stuff, and then was the next place he was stationed was up in Belgium. He was in the ordnance division, the service of supply, and he had a Jeep, and he had to be out ahead of the men and the artillery, and he named his Jeep John 316. He put it up on the windshield, John 316, and he said it was amazing how many American boys would read that and not know what it was. And much later, I was talking with somebody that had been in service and knew Fred and all. He had talked to some fella that had passed the place where they stored the army stuff, you know, that was used but out of use. And there was a storage of Jeeps, and he saw Fred's Jeep. He saw Fred's John 316 Jeep, and that impressed him a lot. But when he went, was in his Jeep up in Belgium. He was out just out in the open, and a plane strafed and shot at them, and he had to get out of the Jeep, crawl under. I probably, I remember Sergeant Scheinfeld. He talked about him. I think Scheinfeld was Fred's handyman, and Sergeant Scheinfeld was probably with him at that time, but they had to crawl under the Jeep and avoid the strafing from the plane. And we did all sorts of things when soldiers were in Europe and other places, I'm sure. But I remember baking cookies and sealing them, and we got little, they furnished somewhere, we got little gallon buckets, and we'd bake stuff and seal it in these little buckets and send them to Europe, and send them to wherever they'd find their soldiers. And when Fred was up in Belgium, I remember it was approaching Christmas time, and I put a chicken in one of the little buckets and pressured it. I put it in the pressure cooker and sealed it and mailed it to Belgium. And the first letter I got back from that location was he had eaten my chicken for Christmas dinner and shared it with a priest in a nearby church, and that impressed us a lot. But my children have not heard all these things. It's real surprising to Jenny when I told her about sending buckets of food. She was real impressed with that. So Fred remained in Germany a while after D-Day, and he was in the Army of Occupation for a while, and he wrote home telling me how he kind of disobeyed rules by helping some German families whenever he got a chance, giving them buckets of peanut butter and just food. People were in need, and he did those kind of things, which was impressive to us too. But when he got back, we were in Overton, and we got word that Fred was going to be discharged down in South Texas, and he was going to ride the train through Overton. And so he wrote and told us when he was going to pass through Overton. So we all went down to the depot and stood, and when the train went by, it went by in a hurry. He was on the caboose waving to us, but he had to go on to some town, a big army place in Texas. I can't remember all these locations, but it was 2 or 3 days before he got back up to us in Overton. And he had been in service 44 months. That was a long time. One time, the last time he was in Europe, it was 13 months that we didn't see him. We had mail, but no sign of Dad at all. We got back to Oklahoma City, and I had got the little house paid for, but we needed a bigger one. So Fred had lived with, before we were married, before he ever came to Texas, he lived with these 2 widow ladies, and we would go, after we moved to the city, we would go into their home and eat Sunday dinner from church, it was Mrs. Mate had this nice 3-bedroom home at 909 Northeast 18th, and I'm sure Mrs. Mate gave Fred a real good bargain on that house. We sold the little house on Pennsylvania and bought the house on Northeast 18th, and Fred went back to work at the Capitol.